let us look back and see what we have learned so far. Clause 4 of the Standard was related to the quality management system and document control. Clause 5 of the Standard covered management responsibilities, and Clause 6 focused on the resource management. This clause, that is Clause 7, is on product realization. The word realization here means manufacturing a product or providing a service. At this point, let us also talk about the exclusions, which we talked about at the very beginning of this course. The Standard allows exclusions to the Standard, but those are limited to requirements within Clause 7, as long as these exclusions do not affect the organization's ability or responsibility to provide product that meets customer and applicable legal requirements. This clause requires organization to plan the process of product realization, from the stage of receiving order, to final delivery, and service after sales. The process of planning starts with establishing quality objectives, and the requirements for the product. The organization needs to establish processes, and provide resources necessary to achieve quality objectives. Necessary controls are required, to ensure that the objectives are being met. These controls could be verification, validation, monitoring, measurement, inspection and testing. Records are required to be kept, to demonstrate that the requirements are met. Earlier in this course, we discussed a customer satisfaction model. The process of customer satisfaction starts with the customer requirements, and ends with achieving customer satisfaction. That is precisely the purpose of this section of the Standard. To satisfy a customer, you need to satisfy the customer's requirements. To do that, you need to know them. This is what this clause focuses on. Organizations must systematically determine the customer requirements. Some requirements are specifically stated by the customer, however many a times customer does not mention them, but these unspecified requirements are also required to be met. Also, there are statutory and regulatory requirements, which the organization must meet. In addition, an organization might have internal requirements. Once the requirements are established, the next logical step is to review them, and see whether the organization has the ability to meet them. This should be done prior to committing the product or service to the customer. The Standard requires that records of this process of reviewing customer requirements are maintained. If customer does not provide a documented requirements, in other words, the order is a verbal order, the organization shall confirm the requirements with the customer, to avoid any ambiguity or misunderstanding. In the process of fulfilling customer requirements, if the requirements get changed, the organization should manage these changes by amending the documents and informing the relevant persons. In the process of meeting customer requirements, the organization shall maintain effective communication with the customer. The organization shall make arrangements for customer feedback related to quality of product or service, to continually improve their performance. In the term design and development, design is the process of creating a new product or process, whereas the word development relates to making changes to an existing product or process. These 7 areas of design and development process will be discussed in the following slides. Design and development should be a planned effort. The plan may include the breakdown of the design and development processes to manageable units, the persons responsible, time frame to achieve these sub-tasks, and resource requirements, etc. It should also include the control activities, such as design review, verification and validation at appropriate stages. Design and development activities involve various groups in the organization. There should be a clarity on the roles and responsibilities, and the organization should ensure effective communication between these groups. Design and development plans should be updated as it progresses. Design and development inputs define the requirements to be met by the product or the service. The product requirements include functional requirements, legal requirements, information from similar design, or any other requirements not covered here. The inputs are reviewed for adequacy. The design input requirements must be complete and unambiguous, and not in conflict with each other. Design output is normally in the form of a drawing or a document. It might even be an electronic three-dimensional model. The standard requires that the output should be in a form suitable for verification against inputs. Design and development output is required to be approved prior to release. In addition, the standard requires that the output should meet 4 conditions mentioned on this slide, and these are: the output should meet the input requirements. It should provide appropriate information for purchasing, production and service provision. It should contain or reference product acceptance criteria, and it should specify the characteristics of the product that are essential for its safe and proper use. The standard requires that the design be systematically reviewed at appropriate stages. Design review is conducted to assess the extent to which the design meets the customer, legal, and internal requirements. All functional representatives related to the design are involved in this process. The problems are identified, and action plan is made to resolve those issues. The standard requires the record of the design review process to be maintained. The purpose of design verification is to ensure that the design and development output meets the input requirements. The standard requires that the record of this process be maintained. The purpose of design validation is to check how the product is expected to work under real-life situation. The standard does not prescribe how the validation is to be done. This might be done by prototype testing or some sort of a pilot project. However, the standard requires that the resulting product should be capable of meeting the requirements or the intended use. If it is practicable, the design and development validation should be done prior to the release of the product. The standard requires that record of this process be maintained. There are many reasons for design changes. Changes might occur due to change of customer requirement, legal requirements, or business realities. These changes need to be managed. The standard requires that record of these changes be maintained. As the original design was reviewed, verified, and validated, the same process applies to the changes as well. Changes should not be seen in isolation. The effect of changes on the constituent parts, and on the product already delivered, should also be evaluated. This part of the standard deals with the purchasing process. Let us talk here what we discussed in Clause 4.1 of this standard regarding outsourced process. The controls on outsourced processes shall be defined in the QMS. And despite of having controls and defining them in the QMS, the organization still is responsible for outsourced processes. It does not absolve the organization of its responsibilities. The organization shall ensure that the purchased product conforms to specified purchase requirements. The type and the extent of control applied to the supplier in the purchased product shall be dependent upon the effect it may have on the final product. These controls may be in the form of audits, inspections, testing, or surveillance, etc. To ensure that the supplier is capable of supplying the product or service, the organization shall evaluate and select them based on established selection criteria. The suppliers may be re-evaluated with time. The standard requires the records of these evaluations to be maintained. This clause of the standard focuses on the adequacy of the purchasing information. In addition to the product requirements, it may also include the acceptance requirements, and requirements related to suppliers' personnel, and the quality management system. This clause also requires that the organization will ensure the adequacy of purchase information prior to conveying it to the supplier. Since ultimately the organization is responsible for the final product, it needs to establish controls on the purchased products. To ensure that the purchased product meets the purchase requirements, the organization shall inspect, or by other means such as audit or surveillance ensure that the purchased product meets the requirements. If the organization or its customer intend to inspect or verify the product at the supplier's premises, it should be conveyed at the time of ordering. This section of the standard covers the processes which convert the customer's requirements into the product or service, or the operational activities of the organization. Production or services should be carried out in a controlled way. Control is achieved by having the required information related to product or service. If required, the organization should have the work instructions or procedures to carry out the required processes. The organization should provide suitable equipment to perform the processes. The organization should ensure the availability of monitoring and measuring equipment, and the actual implementation of the monitoring and measurement. Clause 7.6 of the standard covers the requirements related to monitoring and measuring equipment in more details. The organization should also implement a system to control post-production activities. This clause refers to the processes which, once carried out, their output cannot be verified. The standard requires additional control for these types of activities. Earlier in 1994 version of the standard, these activities were called special processes. Standard requires these processes to be validated, and to demonstrate that under controlled conditions, the required results will be achieved. The first step in this process is to have review and approval criteria. Approval of equipments used, and qualification of personnel involved is required. Specific methods and procedures should be used. Records of validation are maintained, and with significant changes, the process is required to be revalidated. When something goes wrong, the companies recall their product. This is quite common in medical, food, and automobile sector. How would that be possible if they did not maintain the batch numbers, or the traceability? Identification and traceability are closely related, but they are not the same. You can identify a product by providing a serial number, but the traceability means that you would be able to provide the history of it. The standard requires that the organizations will maintain identification of the product by suitable means. Where traceability is required, the organization shall provide unique identification to the product, and maintain records. This clause is related to the product provided by the customer to the organization for including in the final product. The organization will take care of customer-supplied product while it is under organization's control. This product will be identified, verified, protected, and safeguarded. If during this process, the customer-supplied product is lost, damaged, or found unfit for use, the organization shall inform the customer about it, and keep a record of it. Customer product is not necessarily a physical product, it could be intellectual property, or personal data. The purpose of these requirements is to avoid damage and deterioration of products during internal processing and during the delivery process. The process of preservation includes identification, handling, packaging, storage, and protection. These requirements are not limited to the final product, but also apply to the constituent parts of the product. The first step in controlling the monitoring and measuring equipments is to identify the measurements to be taken, and then identifying the equipments for these measurements. The organization is then required to establish the process to ensure that the measurements meet the requirements. If a computer software is used as a part of the measurement systems, validate the performance of the software prior to the use and later when necessary. It is required to calibrate the measuring and monitoring equipment against the international standard. The calibration may be carried out prior to use or at an interval specified by the organization. During calibration, it may be required to adjust the equipment to meet the calibration requirements. Also, the organization should ensure that the equipment is protected from adjustments which will affect the calibration of the equipment adversely. The organization should have a system of providing the status of the calibration. Many organizations provide the status of calibration by placing a sticker on the equipment, but that is just one of the options. Records of calibration shall be maintained. If during calibration process, the equipment is found to be out of calibration, that means that some of the previous measurement might also have been affected. In that case, the organization is required to assess and record the validity of previous results.
Let's discuss once again the main clauses of the standard.
Clause 4 of the standard was related to the quality management system and document control.
Clause 5 of the standard covered the management responsibilities.
Clause 6 focused on the resource management.
Clause 7 was related to product realization processes.
This last clause 8 is related to the requirements of fact-based continual improvement through measurement and the analysis of data. The organization is required to plan its measurement, analysis, and improvement processes. The purpose of these processes is to demonstrate conformity to product requirements and to ensure the conformity to and continual improvement of the quality management system. These are high-level requirements for continual improvement. The details of these are provided in further sub-clauses. Clause 5.2, under Management Responsibilities section of the standard, requires the top management to ensure that the customer requirements are determined and met with the aim of enhancing customer satisfaction. This section aims at monitoring the customer perception of the product or service. In this clause, the standard does not focus on whether the organization has met the requirements or not, rather it focuses on the customer's perception of that, whether the customer feels that the requirements are met or not. The organization shall determine the methods of obtaining data related to customer satisfaction. The data related to customer satisfaction may be obtained from surveys, lost business analysis, compliments, or warranty claims, etc. One of the most important objectives of an internal quality audit is to measure the effectiveness of an organization's quality management system. The organization shall conduct internal audits at planned intervals. For planning the audit program, the organization should take into consideration the status and importance of the processes and the areas to be audited, as well as the results of previous audits. The audit criteria, scope, frequency and methods shall be defined. While selecting auditors for an audit, the organization will ensure that the objectivity and impartiality of the audit is maintained. One way of ensuring impartiality is by ensuring that the auditor does not audit her own work, or the work under her direct influence. We earlier talked about 6 mandatory procedures to be established by the organization. Internal audit procedure is one of them. Internal audit procedure will include responsibilities and requirements for planning and conducting audits. It shall also include the issues related to reporting and recording of audit results. After the issue of report, the standard expect actions to be taken without undue delays. This action will include correcting the situation and taking the corrective action to eliminate the cause of the problem. The standard expects that the audit findings are followed up till necessary action is taken, and reporting the results of verification. Follow-up and closing the audit findings is generally found to be the weakest link in the audit process. This clause of the standard expects that the processes shall be monitored and measured to ensure that the plan results are achieved. Out of monitoring and measuring, the standard makes the monitoring process a mandatory requirement, while the measurement is an option if applicable. With the help of monitoring and measuring, if it is found that the process is not achieving the desired results, necessary correction and corrective action must be taken by the organization. In addition to monitoring the processes, as discussed in the previous slide, the organization shall also monitor and measure the products. It will be done to ensure that the product characteristics meet the requirements. This monitoring and measuring shall be done in a planned way. The organization shall keep the records of conformity of the product with the requirements. Records shall indicate the person or persons authorizing release of the product for delivery to the customer. The product shall not be released to the customer until all requirements are met satisfactorily. In case there is need to release the product when the requirements are not fully met, the standard requires that these releases shall be authorized by relevant authority in the organization, and if it is required, it shall even be approved by the customer. Mistakes do happen, things do get wrong. With all procedures and controls, there still might be non-conforming products or parts. This section deals with these types of situations. All non-conforming products shall be suitably identified to ensure that these are not used by mistake. One way of doing this might be by attaching a tag or a sticker to the product. The standard requires a documented procedure to control the non-conforming products. When a non-conforming product is corrected, it should be re-verified to ensure that it now meets the requirements. A non-conforming product can be dealt in 3 different ways. 1. The non-conformity could be eliminated by repair, rework, or reprocessing. 2. It might be released under concession by relevant authorities, and where applicable by the customer. 3. It might be put to an alternate use, such as regrading. Sometimes the non-conformity is detected after releasing the product to the customer. The organization is expected to take necessary actions appropriate to the situation. One example of it could be the product recall. The organization is expected to maintain the record of the non-conformity and the actions taken. The standard requires the organization to determine, collect, and analyze appropriate data. The intended purpose of this exercise is to evaluate the effectiveness of the current quality management system and potential of improvements in it. This analysis provides information related to customer satisfaction, product conformity, suppliers, and opportunities for preventive actions. The requirements related to preventive actions are covered later in this course. ISO uses the word continual improvement and not the continuous improvement. Continual means repeated regularly or recurring, whereas continuous means without interruption. The standard requires that the organization shall continually improve the effectiveness of its QMS. This continual improvement can be achieved through the use of quality policy, objectives, audits, analysis of data, corrective and preventive actions, and management review. This slide presents the requirements of the standard related to the corrective action, and the next slide, which is the last slide of this course, is related to the preventive action. Here we need to understand the difference between the corrective action, and the preventive action. Correction is to fix the symptoms of an existing problem. Corrective action is to fix the causes of an existing problem to stop its recurrence. Preventive action is to fix the causes of a potential problem to stop its occurrence. When we say potential problem, it means the problem has not actually occurred so far and has the potential to occur. The organization is required to establish the documented procedure to address corrective actions. Just like corrective actions, the standard requires the organizations to determine and take appropriate actions to eliminate the causes of potential problems. The standard requires the organizations to establish documented procedure for preventive actions. The standard explicitly requires only 6 documented procedures to be established, and the preventive action is one of them. Just to refresh the memory, these 6 mandatory documented procedures are control of documents, control of records, control of non-conforming products, internal quality audits, corrective action, and preventive action. We hope you enjoyed this course.